reading from Visions of Neil, Neil and the Three Stooges Part 1, which was originally recorded in 1957 and has recently been re-released as part of Rhino Records' The Jack Kerouac Collection. Born in 1922, poet and novelist Jack Kerouac came to represent perhaps more than any other single artist, the Beat generation of the 40s and 50s. His novel On the Road was written in 1952, though not published till 1957, and utilized a technique the author called spontaneous prose, a writing, he said, closely akin to the improvisation of jazz musicians. On the Road, as well as Kerouac's 15 other novels and hundreds of poems, proved to be a tremendous influence on thinkers, artists, and many others long after their publication. Kerouac died in 1969 at the age of 47. Tonight on Heat, we'll be focusing on the life and work of Jack Kerouac, and we're honored to have as our guests poet Allen Ginsberg and Jan Kerouac, novelist who is Jack Kerouac's daughter. Good evening to both of you.
Very Hi, succinct.
Hi. Well, they keep me succinct here on this program, like whatever I try to do. The Three Stooges, Neil Cassidy and Jack Kerouac, are like sort of the three things fused into the piece we just heard there. What do you know about any of that imagery? I listen to it as sort of a found object, but I have a feeling that you know it much differently.
Well, you know the Three Stooges.
Of course, of course.
Well, fortunately, television has revived what would otherwise be a dated, anachronistic comedy team. And so Kerouac's description of them, like the fellow with the feathery hair, is recognizable, at least for this part of the millennium. What he was doing was taking his very romantic hero, Neil, who had gone through many adventures and misadventures, but was basically an erotic hero, as well as sort of a national hero type, or an adventurer, or a picaresque adventurer, with overtones of all-American cowboy Western masculinity, charm, and boyishness. And in a later phase of Neil Cassidy's life, when he was running himself ragged, comparing him as a sort of a witty comedian, or a witless witty comedian, like one of the Three Stooges, because this is a passage where he's had an accident with his thumb. I think he's hit his girlfriend and he's broken his thumb. There's a huge bandage around his thumb. So he's rushing around San Francisco or wherever he's going and driving with this bandage sticking out like a sort of balloon on his hand, and trying to keep the hand up so that the hand will heal. And so the bandage is predominant, like one of the bandages on the bald skull of one of the Three Stooges. So he's making a sort of almost unheroic, but very funny, very witty comparison with his romantic hero and one of the more foolish of the American Hollywood comedian types. And as Neil grew older and more ragged and more threadbare and more difficult, he's sort of having him transcend his earlier romantic, erotic persona and turning him into like a wise fool, full of energy. You're getting slapped on the head with boards with nails in them, or stumbling and bonking his nose. Clown, yeah. Yes. He's personifying him as a kind of clown, but a kind of wise clown.
Someone described to me, who has absolutely no authority whatsoever, except that I remembered what they said, that to him, Beat in Beat Generation meant tragedy and foolishness, sort of from one paragraph to the next.
Well, and also being at the bottom of the barrel of the soul, looking up at the stars, and beatific at the same time. It was a root word. I think originally it meant to unname the generation. It wasn't intended as a classical remark. It was intended as an offhand remark. His friend John Holmes wrote an essay in the New York Times, 1952, quoting Kerouac, saying, "This is the Beat generation." So the stereotype stuck.
What do you think of the stereotypes that have grown up around your father and that you have grown up around, Jan Kerouac? Do they fit? Do they stick? Do they not?
Well, you always liked that passage, didn't you?
What passage?
You always
Which
liked Neil and the Three Stooges.
Oh, I've always loved, As a matter of fact, before I even knew my father, or even knew that my father existed, I loved the Three Stooges when I was very young, when I was like 3 and 4. And it was my daily tragedy that the Three Stooges had to be turned off and I had to eat dinner. And then later on it was Perry Como and other boring things that I thought were very boring at the time.
No, I think you can say that they were very boring at the time.
When did you encounter this prose, the Neil and the Three Stooges, which I heard you say you liked a lot among his work?
Oh, I'm not sure what year it was. It was a few years ago, and you, Alan, gave me the tape. And I just listened to it over and over again because it was just so entertaining to hear him say things like, in the Baroque period of the Three Stooges, which I thought was hilarious. Just the idea that there was a Baroque period, you know, when he was saying that the blows had become more violent and I don't know. I liked his point of view of the humor of it.
Mm-hmm.
That, in fact, I like his point of view of the Three Stooges actually better than I like the Three Stooges themselves, I should mention.
No, I can see that.
At this point, I don't really enjoy watching them that much because they are awfully violent. But
I actually wish I'd had that piece to whip out when my mother would say, "Don't watch the Three Stooges." I could say, "Hey, look, there's this poet, you know,
You
of our
realize
generation."
in a sense, that very early piece of pop art writing, 1950, is sort of a precursor to pop art. The use of these popular stereotype TV or Hollywood images and raising them up to sort of eternal grandeur. As Jan said, she liked his view of the Three Stooges and his humor approaching it better than the original, though the original was pretty funny, actually. But Kerouac also did that with Joan Crawford in a long passage called Joan Rorschach's in the Fog.
Joan Crawford in the Fog.
Yeah. Kerouac's actually a precursor to what later became pop art, sort of in Warhol and in even Tom Wolfe, that sort of pop art style.
People
Pop
do
art,
that with
prose
everything.
style, yeah.
They glamorize. People tend to glamorize everything that happened in the past because it's like it already happened. But you can't glamorize the future because it hasn't happened yet.
And it's hard to glamorize the present unless you're a Buddhist.
Glamorizing the present, was that what Jack Kerouac was about?
I think, as Woznесensky, the poet, said, he understood the nostalgia of the present. But I think Kerouac was acquainted with the sense of the sacramental presence, or the sacramental aspect of present consciousness and present personae, the world as it was, when he walked through it as a transitory place, and so therefore more immortal and more exquisite.
And so the Three Stooges was an artifact from the present.
Yes, at that time, sure. Yeah, though I think he was recalling it from the 30s and 40s, actually, and then comparing later Neil in the 50s to the earlier comedy, Americana comedy.
How does one...
But you were asking her...
Go ahead.
You were asking Jan a question which I kind of interrupted.
Oh, I can't remember what...
Yeah, I do. It was how did she, when growing up among these stereotypes of the Beat Generation, how did she evaluate all that? What was your insight?
I wasn't even aware of the stereotypes, actually. Let me see.
But did like adults come up to you and say, well, you're going to grow up and be like, you know, a sort of beat...
No.
Beat 2?
Nobody ever said...
Yeah.
Oh, come to think of it, no. I do remember people, very few, a small handful of people saying that I was the princess of the Beat Generation because my father was the king. Therefore, it stood to reason that I must be the princess. And I just thought that was kind of a joke. I mean, I didn't know my father. I met him twice, so I didn't really have him around in my environment when I was growing up much.
What was it like to hear these tapes?
Oh, just thrilling. Wonderful, because I didn't hear my father's voice when I was growing up, and it's just such a pleasure to be able to hear him just babbling on freely. Because the times I met him, he was rather nervous, thinking, "Oh, I'm going to meet my daughter," and I didn't admit that I was her father. So
How do you know he thought that?
Well, lots of people have told me. I have reason to believe that because he was being taken to court for child support and had to have a blood test before he would actually pay any child support. But that's common. I've seen it, in later years. I've experienced it myself with people I've known, and so I don't blame him for that.
Is the babbling, the foolishness, and the imagery in the voice of the tapes familiar to you, or is it just exciting to you but very external?
Yeah, that's another strange thing. It's both fascinating because it comes from him and I didn't know him, but yet it almost feels like it's coming from the inside because I feel that I am him in some ways, or he is me, or I can just feel the connection.
Let's hold that for 1 second. Our conversation with Allen Ginsberg and Jan Kerouac continues, as well as more of the voice of Jack Kerouac and his work. This is Heat. I'm John Hockenberry.
A lot of people have asked me why did I write that book or any book. All the stories I wrote were true because I believed in what I saw. I was traveling west one time at the junction of the state line of Colorado. It's arid western one, and the state line of poor Utah. I saw in the clouds, huge and massed above the fiery golden desert of Evenfall, a great image of God with forefinger pointed straight at me, through halos and rolls and gold folds that were like the existence of the gleaming spear in his right hand, which saith, "Come on, boy, go thou across the ground. Go moan for man. Go moan. Go groan. Go groan alone. Go roll your bones alone. Go thou and be little beneath my sight. Go thou and be minute as seed in the pod. Go thou, die hence. And of this world report you well and truly." Anyway, I wrote the book because we're all gonna die. In the loneliness of my life, my father dead, my brother dead, my mother far away, my sister and my wife far away. Nothing here but my own tragic hands that once were guarded by a world of sweet attention, that now are left to guide and disappear their own way into the common dark of all our death. Sleeping in me raw bed alone and stupid, with just this one pride and consolation. My heart broke in the general despair and opened up inwards to the Lord. I made a supplication in this dream. So in the last page of On the Road, I describe how the hero, Dean Moriarty's come to see me all the way from the West Coast just for a day or two. We've just been back and forth across the country several times in cars, and now our adventures are over. We're still great friends, but we have to go into later phases of our lives. So there he goes, Dean Moriarty, ragged in a moth-eaten overcoat he brought specially for the freezing temperatures of the East, walking off alone, and last I saw him, he rounded the corner of 7th Avenue, eyes on the street ahead, and bent to it again. Gone. So, in America, when the sun goes down, and I sit on the old broken-down river pier watching the long, long skies over New Jersey and sense all that raw land that rolls in one unbelievable huge bulge over to the West Coast, and all that road going, and all the people dreaming in the immensity of it. In Iowa, I know by now that children must be crying in the land where they let the children cry. And tonight the stars will be out, and don't you know that God is Pooh Bear? The evening star must be drooping and shedding her sparkler dims on the prairie, which is just before the coming of complete night that blesses the earth, darkens all the rivers, cups the peaks, and folds the final shore in. Nobody knows what's going to happen to anybody besides the forlorn rags of growing old. Think of Dean Moriarty, I even think of old Dean Moriarty, the father we never found. Think of Dean Moriarty, I think of Dean Moriarty.
Jack Kerouac there, accompanied by Steve Allen, reading from On the Road and Visions of Cody, a selection from Rhino Records, the Jack Kerouac Collection, which is a collection of tapes of Jack Kerouac's works read by the author. Before that, we heard Zoot Sims playing Zoot Swings the Blues. This is Heat. I'm John Hockenberry. Tonight we're remembering the poet and novelist Jack Kerouac with our guest, poet Allen Ginsberg, and novelist Jan Kerouac, who is Jack Kerouac's daughter. Allen, On the Road took a while to get published after it was written.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, the style was a completely new, a kind of telepathic, spontaneous prose that drew on your inner thought and the associations of your inner thought and rearranged English sentence structure to American interior monologue speech. It was originally written as one single paragraph on a several hundred-foot teletype roll provided by Lucian Carr, night bureau manager at United Press. And so the whole tone of the book was quite startling to someone accustomed to the traditional, rather tame novel form. Kerouac invented a new form of writing that is actually spread and come to dominate prose in this half of the 20th century.
You called it a
known as
minute
new
ago.
journalism in a sense, like with Tom Wolfe or Hunter Thompson or even Truman Capote finally marched along to Kerouac's style and beat.
You called it the American interior monologue.
Well, don't think I've used that phrase before, but when you get phrases that you had before, like Golgothian panoplies, it's a sound. He's going along the track of vowels. He very often might mouth or say something that he's not sure what it means until it gets down there on the page, or maybe an hour later he recognizes the significance of what he's saying. Like there's a very beautiful phrase in On the Road talking about the mad road winding ahead with the seizure, keening ahead with the seizure of tarpaulin power. So the phrase tarpaulin power, Kerouac pointed that out to me, said, I didn't know what I meant when I wrote that, but it's obviously the tarpaulin that you wrap on the backs of those big, huge trucks full of logs or pipes. A keening and a seizure of tarpaulin power. Talking about a big truck coming down the road out of the Rockies down over the Wasatch down toward Salt Lake. So he had to trust his mind and trust the whole mind, and so there was the basic notion of spontaneous writing, which is actually quite old and traditional in the Orient, and even traditional in Western poetry. I mean, Shelley wrote Ozymandias in 10 minutes, a sonnet. But also informed by like a kind of introspective awareness of the associations of his mind while he was putting it to pen to paper or typewriter to the teletype roll. And it's summed up later, in later generations, by the motto of the Jack Kerouac School of Poetry in Boulder, Colorado, at Naropa Institute as first thought, best thought. Now, if you have a whole bunch of academic people who think you're supposed to revise and revise and revise and not show signs of yourself, and not show signs of your original mind, of natural order of thought, but that poetry should be a well-wrought urn, as they say, or combed rather than shaggy, and that it should no show of the behind, or the front, or the privates of the mind. They didn't want to see the privates of the mind.
So you think that was the reason why publishing was so
very
difficult?
Yes, I think so. It was just, at first, difficult to swallow, difficult to read, although it was absolutely natural. I mean, how come nobody noticed Van Gogh when he was alive? They couldn't see it. How come nobody noticed Picasso's Demoiselle d'Avignon when he first did it? They couldn't see it. Critics first couldn't understand Kerouac. They didn't know how to read it. They were looking for paragraphs and sentence enders and closures. They weren't looking for the onward rush of association and humor of phrasings like Golgothian panoplies.
Tarpaulin power.
Yeah.
How aware of that? I mean, how much of that did you see when you were together?
I had the same problem with Hal,
Yeah.
But at first, it took me quite a while to catch on to what Kerouac was doing, and then begin imitating it. And I would like to put on the record that I'm, at this point, much more regarded academically, as he has a distinguished professor at Brooklyn and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and in some quarters thought to be standard American literature in the Oxford Anthology or the Norton. That I'm just imitating Kerouac's original discoveries. I'm just applying them. He's my guru in poetry and prose. Not only that, he's also my guru in pronunciation and vocalization. Because if you hear his voice, as you've just heard, there's a kind of tenderness about it, and a playfulness, a supreme sophisticated intelligence.
He imitates you at one point. There's a phrase in something we heard a little earlier. He sandwiches those greasy socialists. And it's an imitation of you, it seems.
Well,
like.
he's kidding, I think.
He's kidding
he's
you,
also
yeah.
making fun of me. I think,
Yeah.
if anything, later on I'm imitating him when I'm talking about delicatessen intellectuals or something. Yeah, I take a lot of my thinking from him, my thinking processes. Sort of like, your parents imprint you with their conditioning, or some great teacher does, or a guru does. I'm imprinted very much by Kerouac's character and his characteristic mouthing or phrasing of things. Particularly memorable for me was him reading Shakespeare and a Hamlet soliloquy, where Hamlet sits down on the steps and says, "And I sit here like John of Dreams."
Was that ever taped?
No. Well, I
Oh,
don't think so.
a shame. I'd like to
It's just
hear
I heard him read it, or maybe on
Yeah.
a tape that John Holmes made in 1947. But when he said, he didn't say like John of Dreams. He said like John of Dreams. And I said, oh, what a humor he has for that. How he interpreted the word so exquisitely, by going off into a dreamy phrasing of it, like a musician, but like a great actor, or someone who understood the word and understood the phrasing. And for as Kerouac said of Shakespeare, genius is funny. John of Dreams, John O'Dreams.
How much of a struggle was it for Kerouac personally to get On the Road published? Was it something he cared about? Was it something he was working to have happen all the time? Or was the publishing of the novel something that happened sort of as an afterthought in 1957?
Well, he was very much interested in having it, or any of the other 13 books he wrote, until it was published. He went on immediately to write an even greater book on the same subject with the same hero, Visions of Cody, which is much larger, more depth, more magnificent in its prose, and that seizure of tarpaulin power comes there, I think, in Visions of Cody. And that little phrase, that little paragraph just played, which he interpolated in On the Road, about I'm sitting here writing with my mother dead, my father dead, and nothing left but my own hands, which are going to die. As his reason for writing, like the compassion of just being alive and suffering, and expressing that. That's from Visions of Cody, his next book, which he wrote almost immediately thereafter, and then went on to write Dr. Sachs. That's 1952-53. Then went on already, I think, within that same period, Maggie Cassidy, The Subterraneans, an affair he had at the time, 1953, fall 1953 already. On the Road's 51, 52, and there's already Dr. Sachs, Maggie Cassidy, Visions of Gerard, his brother who died. So he was tremendously productive and working like a saint of prose, interested primarily in the process of writing, and in the joy of producing something that he could type up and line up on the shelves and have something to read in his old age, is what he said.
Really?
Yes, but he was also very embittered, realizing he was like a great innovative writer, and he was totally rejected, and nobody understood what he was doing, not even his best friends, including me. When he did Visions of Cody, that blew my mind, and took me months to accommodate to the breakthrough that he had and to understand what he was doing.
Was there an editor who was convinced? An editor who can be said to have discovered?
Not at the time. Robert Giroux was a very good editor and had published his earlier Town and the City, but immediately rejected On the Road and just couldn't understand it. Maybe had some difficulty with Kerouac, or with his own personality in relation to Kerouac, because he was very fond of Kerouac, perhaps overly fond. And he was maybe disappointed in Kerouac's response to his editorial judgment, let us say. So there was nobody until Malcolm Cowley, the great critic, came along. Cowley, a friend of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and an admirer of Thomas Wolfe and Americanists, who understood immediately that Kerouac was a great voice, and then spent 4 years trying to convince the owner, and almost didn't.
All right, we're going to hear more of the words of Jack Kerouac, in the voice of Jack Kerouac, and I'll continue a conversation with my guests, Jan Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. Heat is supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. Additional support comes from WBUR in Boston and from Rhino Records, the company that specializes in reissue labels. Still to come in this hour, haikus, Kerouac style. This
Blues
is Heat.
and haikus with Al
Blues
Cohen
and
Zook
haikus.
Sims.
This is Heat. I'm John Hockenberry. Yeah, Jack Kerouac.
Al Cohen.
Al Cohen and Zoot
Al
Sims.
Cohen.
Al Cohen.
And Zoot Sims trading off saxophone obligatos in response to Kerouac's tones and his haikus.
In the studio with me, of course, Allen Ginsberg, poet Allen Ginsberg, and Jan Kerouac, a daughter of Jack Kerouac. It's pretty infectious listening to those haikus, wouldn't you say?
I'd say they were definitely what you would call nostalgia for the present.
Well, what's really amazing, I think, is here you got the perceiver who has these piquant perceptions, appreciating his own perceptions, able to write them down, and then able to vocalize them in a way that you can understand them, because the voice has this little shading of humor or significance or signifying or enthusiasm like blackbird, no, bluebird, branch still waving,
Yeah, that was
still
great.
jumping, or the bottoms of my shoes are wet from walking in the rain.
Yeah, it crumbles down there.
The rain gets kind of a nasally thing.
The intonations are so subtle and so intelligent that you suddenly realize you've got a complete conduit, unobstructed, from the bottom of his brain all the way to the external phenomenal world. And you really see how somebody engages with the phenomenal world, with the playfulness of the human mind and the exquisiteness of human speech. And you don't get that anywhere else, not in the New York Times with all this 1,000 pages a month, not in any of the governmental bulletins about Iraq and their own stupidities, just repeating their own minds. And
Usually the only
blindness.
place you get it from is kids.
Kids,
And
old
he
ladies,
is a kid.
and old ladies.
He's an eternal boy.
Well, I think
some
there's
ways.
very mature
Yeah.
perceptions and very mature, sophisticated way of dealing with them.
Yeah.
But certainly childlike or kid-like freshness to what he's seeing.
And innocence.
Yeah. I mean, I'm saying not kid in the sense that, oh, yeah, Kerouac is overgrown baby or something.
No, no.
It's the kind of criticism you always hear.
You heard a lot of that. I mean, you faced a lot of
Handles
that
of it.
kind of criticism. Not
Well,
that you're
he
saying
did
that.
too.
yeah.
I think it poisoned his existence. The lack of the stupid lack of appreciation, just in the tone of his voice, even. You know, the intelligence of his tones. That's what's so amazing, and it's right there in the poetry and the prose.
It should be pointed out, expanding on what you're saying, that to get this collection, I mean, to listen to this voice is a literary exercise. It's not a nostalgia thing. I mean, you hear,
You're right there present with that
Yeah.
blackbird, no, bluebird
Yeah.
branch still jumping, or the cat stopping when it thunders,
Yeah.
walking along the bench, or the lonely businessman crossing the football field at dusk. They're just such pure moments, and he saw it. And it teaches the listener's mind to see and hear the phenomenal world again. You know, to recognize his own perceptions. They're like bodhisattva little utterances, slogans, or capping lines, or key lines in a Zen drama of the universe, where the listener begins to dig his own mind and his own perceptions.
does a voice haunt you when you write, Jan Kerouac?
Oh, well, it haunts me all the time. Haven't been writing constantly lately, but
You're working on a book.
yes, I'm working on a book called Parrot Fever, fiction this time. Yeah, it haunts me a lot. In fact, sometimes when I say something, it will remind me of his voice, and then I'll play around with my voice. And just like Allen has learned a lot from his usage of vowels and consonants and special way that he mouths them. I didn't come to it the same way, perhaps, but I'm equally fascinated by just the phenomenon of hearing his voice.
And we can hear your voice, Allen Ginsberg. You have a new record out, speaking of poets, on
Yep.
tape with music, on Island Records, The Lion for Real.
Yeah. A lot of good musicians. There's a very much well-prepared background for and accompaniments and compositions that go along with the poems. So
Hal Wilner produced it.
Wilner produced it with Mark
Didn't you have the show?
Ribot, who's now having a great album of his own from Ireland, and Bill Frisell, and a lot of the musicians that work with Tom Waits, whose voice we heard paying homage to Kerouac at the beginning of this program.
Poetry should be heard.
Well, it always was in the time of Homer. Like, that was like the bard, and Kerouac has returned it to the bardic voice.
Well, it's been a pleasure having both of you here tonight. Thank you so much for
Thanks.
coming.
Likewise.
My
Okay,
guests,
Jan.
Allen Ginsberg and Jan Kerouac.
Nice to have a couple of generations together.
Yeah, for a change.
What's not to like?
Thanks to poet Allen Ginsberg and novelist Jan Kerouac. Heat is a production of Murray Street Enterprise, New York, in association with KQED-FM San Francisco. Heat created by Steve Rath and Leslie Peters. Production funding, Sound Foundation, New York. Additional support from Mother Jones Magazine. Our staff, Ted Bonnet, Ellen Dennis, Donna Gallers, Nick Hill, Brad Klein, Doug Colmar. Our technical director, Lauren Kelly. Our program is produced by R.J. Cutler. My name is John Hockenberry. This is NPR. National Public Radio. Coming up on Heat in the next 60 minutes, a search for the bard. We found one. Maybe you will too tonight. Derek Walcott joins us. Also, some letters from you about our show and about your show, the show in your house. That is our show every night. The next 60 minutes on Heat. Stay tuned.
You are listening to 90.3 FM WCPN Cleveland in cooperation with Cleveland State University.
Strike up the band and ring the bells. WCPN has won the Cleveland-Pittsburgh Challenge thanks to you. I'm Annabelle Singh, and I just wanted to say thank you, along with everyone else at the station, for your support. You've really made us all a winner.
Everyone here at Cleveland Public Radio would like to thank the following companies who donated food and beverages for our on-air guests, volunteers, and staff during the Pittsburgh-Cleveland Challenge. The Cleveland Coca-Cola Bottling Company, Designer Pizza by Utrata, Heinen's, and the Pepsi-Cola Bottling Company.
Currently in downtown Cleveland, it is 54 degrees. Stay with us for the second hour of Heat with John Hockenberry. It's 1 o'clock.
Hey, Lucy, I'm home. Home from wherever Ricky found their Lucy, always Lucy. Without delay, the homecoming in 2 languages. Blue, in the light of cathode ray windows seen from the street by people walking by without homecoming, without home, without Lucy, chilled by blue light from windows not coming. Homecoming in this place where the wanderers organize into industries and the industries sail like Argonauts. And it's always one small step for man, one giant leap for the wanderer, where home is not coming. We are wanderers to the office and around the corner for lunch, sitting next to a face with blue-lit windows of winter, staring at the check, staring at the sky, each wanderer an Odysseus, each Odysseus forgotten, each Odyssey forgotten. The Odysseus stares at you oddly, and he asks the only obvious question.
You talking to me? You talking to me? Talking to me? Then who the hell else are you talking? You talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here.
American wanderers, all islands, all with no home coming. Not like Odysseus, who revealed himself to his son Telemachus after 20 years, he said. Odysseus said, the wanderer said, in the words of Homer, poet of wanderers, no other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one, the same. His bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine. 20 years gone, and I'm back again on my own island. Telemachus began to weep. Salt tears rose from the wells of longing in both men, and cries burst from both as keen and fluttering as those of the great taloned hawk, whose nestlings farmers take before they fly. So helplessly they cried, pouring out tears, and might have gone on weeping so till sundown. Here, after 20 centuries, here in our time, after 20 centuries, we have Odysseus. He's the only one here. We just have no Homer. Hello, Lucy. Am I home? Searching for the bard. We found one tonight on Heat. Tonight, my guest, a lyric bard of our America. We'll be talking with West Indian playwright and poet Derek Walcott. You can meet him too. He's our guest. We'll listen to dramatic readings of listener letters. So keep it where it is for another live hour of Heat. Derek Walcott, your letters, the whole thing. Good evening. This is Heat. I'm John Hockenberry. We're live here in New York City. The news of the hour. An emergency services worker says there are a lot of sick kids among the more than 300 evacuees from Kuwait who arrived at Raleigh-Durham International Airport in North Carolina today. Officials say about 40 children and adults are showing some signs of illness. Some say they drank bad water in Iraq, but a psychologist says many of the symptoms could have been triggered by stress. NATO's top official says the Persian Gulf crisis may force the alliance to rethink its role in world conflicts. NATO Secretary General Manfred Werner criticized some allies for not doing enough to support efforts against Iraq, and he says the alliance might not be able to afford to continue limiting itself to consultations when the security of NATO members is at stake. September 20th is a day likely to live in German history, certainly world history. Lawmakers from East and West Germany today ratified a treaty that will abolish East Germany's status as a separate national entity on October 3rd. The treaty, which passed both the East and West German parliaments by wide margins, was the last vote needed to clear the way for German unification. A California couple say they're not willing to share custody of a newborn boy with the infant's surrogate mother. Anna Johnson says she's willing to negotiate what her lawyer calls a shared parenting plan. But the couple, for whom she agreed to bear the baby, which she's not genetically related to, say they won't give up their miracle baby. Charles Keating's bail reduction hearing continues in Los Angeles Superior Court tomorrow. The court heard a full day of testimony in the case of the developer who's facing criminal charges in connection with the collapse of California's Lincoln Savings and Loan. Keating's lawyers say his $5 million bail should be reduced because, his lawyers say, Keating's broke and he won't skip town. Lawyers working for pro bono for Keating? You think that's possible? Maybe not. Yesterday at the annual Commonwealth Nations meeting in Port of Spain, Trinidad, heads of government and finance ministers appealed to developed countries for assistance in facing a sharp rise in oil prices because of the Persian Gulf crisis. Trinidad's Prime Minister Arthur N.R. Robinson said that high oil prices had virtually canceled the benefits of recent debt relief programs for the Commonwealth. Mr. Robinson called on the World Bank to change its current debt rescheduling policy, allowing the Commonwealth countries to refinance their loans. Robinson had been heading an economic austerity program in Trinidad, which was temporarily interrupted last month when an obscure Muslim activist, Abu Bakr, led a group of 130 Muslims in a coup attempt which ultimately failed. Joining us to discuss the Commonwealth Nations meeting, which continues through the end of this week, is Afzal Khan, acting head of news from Trinidad and Tobago Television. Mr. Khan joins us by telephone from his home in Cuvée, Trinidad. Good evening, Mr. Khan.
Good evening, sir.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Tell us what happened at the Commonwealth talks today.
A number of things took place. The meeting ended this evening with the delegates agreeing to what is known as the Trinidad terms, an accord that has been reached in Port of Spain, agreeing to certain terms to assist developing countries in meeting their debt rescheduling payments. Unfortunately for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, those terms will not assist us because we are highly placed in the list. The whole lineup, it's meant to assist those countries based on a pro rata system. And that ratio system that they have worked out is for those countries that can barely meet their debt rescheduling payments. So it's not going to assist us in any way, even though it's named the Trinidad terms.
Mm-hmm. So let me do a little bit of history lesson here as far as Trinidad and Tobago is concerned. Back in 1973, Trinidad was exporting oil, as I recall, and benefited greatly from the rise in oil prices during the Arab oil embargo in 1973. Why is it different this time around?
Because between 1973 and 1983, when the oil prices began to go down, we suffered greatly. Our entire restructuring process took place on the basis that we accepted that oil prices would remain constant for a longer period than it would have. And we entered into a number of industrial projects. One of those industrial projects that we entered into was methanol, ethanol, fertilizer. Unfortunately for us, those projects depended heavily on oil production, oil consumption, your country buying oil from us. What happened over the years was that the oil pattern dwindled for us. Our projections went down, and the fertilizer business throughout the world went down. Now, Trinidad and Tobago may be a very small country, but it produces 1% of the total fertilizer consumption. 1% of that consumption is supplied by Trinidad and Tobago.
And both commodities that Trinidad and Tobago supplies, oil and fertilizer, down. That's, pretty terrible news for the country. Would you say that economics is the reason for the political instability that culminated in the coup attempt this year?
What happened in 1986 was that the Robinson government came in with a lot of promises, and they promised to change things socially. Now, whatever happened economically before did not affect the ordinary man. When the Robinson government came, they came with a lot of promises to affect the ordinary man. Those promises never came into being. And we have had those promises put off from one year after the other after the other. Abu Bakr may have taken those promises and channeled them into his own gut feeling and maybe assumed that the poor man felt what he felt and decided to act based on what he thought were certain presumptions. And that's where the July 27th attempted coup came about.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, tomorrow you have a morning television show there in Trinidad and Tobago, correct?
Yes, we do.
What's the top story tomorrow? And how are you going to be reporting it?
It would be what came out of tonight's winding up of the Commonwealth Finance Ministers meeting. Now, this is a group of 44 countries that are meeting here in Trinidad right now. And they're not only looking at Trinidad and Tobago, but they're looking at the entire third world region. It's a sort of a link between the first world and the third world. We've got a lot of first world countries in the Commonwealth. It's a link off from the old British Raj. And what came out of this meeting was a new concept, a new order, a new reaching out of the first countries trying to reach out to the third countries within the British Commonwealth, within what used to be the British Commonwealth. They have met in Port of Spain. Unfortunately, this time around, this meeting was very short. This meeting lasted over 2 days. It is not normal that a Commonwealth Finance Ministers meeting, which is a forerunner to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, it is not normal for them to meet just over 2 days. Normally, they meet over 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
However, it would seem that the issues before them are very simple and straightforward.
But it sounds like you're also saying that the first world is not maybe so serious or interested in reaching out to the third world this time around, and maybe it would be for a subsequent meeting that the problem would really be addressed.
Well, what came out of this meeting will not